You can't say good evening, folks. It has to be
No, I
good
know,
afternoon. All you people have nothing
Okay.
else to
We
do.
can shut the lights and
Yeah,
we can say good
pretend
evening.
it's evening. So welcome to the board and everyone who's not here, but perhaps will be watching eventually, to the Thursday, May 3rd Town of Wenham Board of Selectmen meeting. It is a little after 4:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. And our first order of business is a public hearing on a proposed new personnel policy regarding creation and administration of a sick bank for non-union employees. I think there's a motion on that, so I move the Board of Selectmen open the public hearing for the purpose of deliberating on a new personnel policy regarding creation and administration of a sick bank for non-union employees.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Sorry, Jim.
Okay, so the hearing,
That's
and it was posted in the newspaper, which,
is required according to our general bylaws, any personnel policy.
and
Must
I...
think we're
Change
blind,
or
John. You
new?
see this? They must
Oh
have-
my God, they wrote this for me.
That's for the
And I actually
visually
did see this
impaired.
in the newspaper, so it actually did. Do I
I
need
think
to
I've been
read it?
drinking all afternoon. Look at this.
Yeah,
Do I
and
need to
look at the
read them?
pages in the back, the little
So it
teeny
was
print.
duly noticed.
Duly noticed, yes.
And normally in a public hearing, I would think we would take comments.
You should.
For and against.
Kathleen, we traditionally invite people up to the podium.
Right. Oh, I don't see any people. So I
Well,
guess,
the audience should know that.
I guess there's no one here who would come to the podium, no one here to speak for or against
Too nice a
this.
day out, everybody's at the beach,
This,
backyard.
That being said, so we have a motion, we have a legal notice. We could perhaps ask Peter to
Yes.
introduce this policy?
Speak on it now, or do you want to close the hearing, or do you want me to
Oh,
just give an
well-
overview? It's whatever your pleasure.
Well, you know, this motion that I read said that the hearing was for the purpose of deliberating.
And it's really just to hear input.
Okay, can I amend that motion? I think we should, the hearing should be for the purpose of hearing input.
Yes.
And
Okay.
we'll assume there's a second and a,
Correct, yes.
I'll
all in
second it.
favor of that? Okay.
Yeah.
So then we can actually
Talk about it.
deliberate. And I guess we'll start with Peter.
Yeah, because what I read
Yep,
was very legalese.
okay.
It's not user-friendly.
Well, I apologize for that. That was policy that I wrote.
So I'm not
And
sure
we all know his real
I
application
got
is
the
as a
general
lawyer.
sense, but I can't say,
What it's about. So
Yeah,
the
how it
idea
works.
of
It looks
a
like it's a
sick
lot of-
leave bank is so that and the program that we've laid out is essentially a voluntary program, and it's for non-union employees at this point because there's no contractual language in any of the 3 union contracts related to having a similar program in place. But the idea is that
so that could happen at a later date.
it could happen at a later date.
At their contract.
Their
renewal or
contract
something.
renewal is next year,
Okay.
so I imagine this is one of the things that might come up in that conversation.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
So right now, the proposed policy would just impact non-union employees, so that's department heads, town hall, COA, library staff that are benefit eligible. So the way it would work, it's a volunteer program, is that employees, if they wanted to participate, would sign up. In this first year, they would donate 2 of their sick days. The second year, after July 1, they donate 2 more, and thereafter they donate 1 day a year into this bank that would be there. And the reason for the bank is if an employee has medical situation, illness that keeps them out of work for a prolonged period, and they use all of their sick personal vacation time, that then they could submit an application to receive additional sick days from this bank so that they would continue to be paid, for their time. So it's something that's a relatively common practice in municipal government, and it's really meant to be to deal with those extenuating circumstances. And that's high level, I guess, what the program is.
What I garnered out of the documentation is, it seems fairly limited and restrictive. Is there a reason for that?
So, the way it's set up is those people would have to make, those 2-day donations the first 2 years and then the 1 day thereafter. And then once it gets up to there's 200 days banked,
I saw that.
then contributions stop until it drops back below the 150.
Oh, somebody has to use.
If somebody uses a significant amount of time, then people have to start paying it back in.
200 hours or 200 days?
200 days.
It's a lot of days.
Well, but you're talking about 40 employees, non-union employees or thereabouts, that could contribute to it. But individual applications would be for up to 20 days. So it's basically.
Everyone contributes to this bank?
Everybody contributes to the bank, and then
I
it's
see.
there, and if somebody has a situation that they need more sick time, they submit an application.
I see.
There's a 3-person committee. It's myself, finance director, who administers the benefits, and then 1 non-union employee. That's how most of these are set up, is some sort of committee. They maintain the confidentiality of the application, obviously, and then they vote on it one way or another. It's a simple majority vote to allocate days from the bank to that person.
So what if I'm an employee, I don't contribute to the bank?
Then you're not eligible to apply.
Got it. So
But you have to
And
apply
once-
for and to donate and apply to receive.
You have to sign up initially. There's a window to sign up. If you don't sign up, you can't decide to sign up.
Unsigned.
Well, you can't decide to sign up hypothetically knowing,
A
like,
week before you think you're gonna
be out.
need it.
Correct. So it's basically everybody who's eligible now, they'll be given the opportunity to sign up. Then you have to be employee for a year. Once you get to that 1-year threshold, you'll be given, you'll be informed that you have to sign up. Let us know within a month. If you don't sign up within that month, then you're not in the bank. And so that's
Is
basically.
that an annual election too?
What's
An
that?
annual election to participate?
People can opt out at any time, but
Well, let's
once
say I have an
once-
opt-in, and so let's
Yep.
say, based on the criteria.
not an annual opt-in, a one-time opt-in.
One time. So if you don't opt in when you're first employed, within a certain days, you can never opt in, is that
Yeah,
right?
so it avoids cherry picking.
Well, okay. Seems a little strict to me.
And I've seen it both ways. I think the majority, what I saw, was a single window opt-in as opposed to an annual process. I think there was maybe 1 annual opt-in.
I think it's a little harsh. I would think you should be able to opt in annually, but not apply for benefits for the first year you're opting in, so you're not saying, oh, God, I'm sick, that was a stupid thing, I didn't opt in, I should, my husband, wife, sickness, said, you should opt in, and that opt-in, so an annual election that precludes you from accessing benefits for the ensuing year, something like that, huh?
I agree. I think that's true. It is.
Because young people make a mistake, that, 10 years later, they're still employed here, but, oh, hey, guess what, it's not a good idea. We should be opting into this thing, just as a insurance thing. It's like insurance.
Well, yeah, and the second part of, I think what Jack said, I think helps with the cherry picking. You can opt in on an annual basis, but you have to wait a year after you opt in to get your,
Yeah, something's got to build up.
so someone's
No,
not
you
going to
can't
opt
access
in
it.
because they know they're gonna need it.
As Peter said, you can't opt in and then start collecting your benefits next week or next month. That doesn't sound right either.
Yeah, I
What do
think
you think about
that's-
that, Peter?
I think that's fair. My recommendation would be, part of this is timely. Part of this is timely. That's why we're meeting on a Thursday afternoon at 4:30, as opposed to just waiting on this until May 15th. Absent being able to amend the policy on the fly, which we may be able to do. I'd suggest approving the policy and then making that change at a later date.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. I think it would be probably more thoughtful to do it that way.
Yeah, I'd hesitate to, I mean, I understand, and like I said, I saw at least one that had somewhat similar language to that.
So it would be part of like the annual,
We can just amend it in a month from now.
yeah. But what we would amend it to was when there's open enrollment, maybe there would be enrollment for this as well.
Right, and realistically,
You want to get the policy approved. I get
Yeah,
it.
right, and,
not hold it up for this.
yeah, and I also think that it's, the policy as is, isn't going to impact anybody negatively without making that change, I guess is my
Right.
point,
I'm fine.
for the foreseeable future.
I'm fine.
Yeah.
John?
Too.
Yep, absolutely.
I'm fine.
Anybody in the audience want to?
Opine?
Any comments?
So we'll just,
Why don't you ask this guy? Pam? No, never mind.
we should like put a recording up there, canned something.
Yeah, applause.
Applause, laughter, I'm not sure. So we'll put this, we'll take action on it today, but
Yeah.
also put it on an agenda
At some
with an
subsequent
amendment
meeting.
at some point in time.
Yep.
Anything?
I'm fine with that. I got it. Every place has an extended sick bank. I'm familiar with the different versions of what you just said. I think this is more parsimonious than most I'm used to, but that's fine.
This is actually less parsimonious than, I tried to water down the
Yeah.
parsimony.
My reaction was the same, but I thought back to the fact that I was probably comparing it to a privately held,
Well, I came from
sector.
private, not-for-profit. You're eligible for 2 sick days a year in the sick bank, and that, just yourself, you personally, and that you had to access your earned time for 5 days before you could access your own, this sick bank, and that most of the people who did it basically went on maternity leave. Women who were on maternity leave, or somebody who had a significant illness and had to be out for an extremely period of time. I either fortunately or unfortunately never accessed mine, so I left a lot of money on the table. But I'm healthy, didn't need it, so
Yeah,
that's fine.
in the big
But I'm fine with this. That sounds good.
Okay.
There should be something in there. This is going to come up. Somebody's going to have, oh my God Almighty, poor so and so, and that we're not, there's no money, and so this 20 days. So all of this is quite modest, I think.
I think it is too.
Yep.
And I do think people's
And
life
it's also got
situation
a lot of
changes.
feel-good to it.
Well, yeah.
You can try to help.
It's self-funded. I mean, gosh.
Yeah, it's right. And I think I could probably think of at least one situation in the past where it would have been useful to have this
Yeah, I can think of one.
in this town hall.
Okay.
So, okay. Are we ready for
Yeah,
a
I think we
motion?
are.
Oh, yeah, we should vote to, well, we
You vote before you.
we changed what the
Oh,
hearing
I'm
sorry.
was.
That's right.
Okay.
So, we'll just,
Didn't I vote to close the hearing?
no, because the
Kept
hearing
it
was
to it.
supposed to include the deliberation, and then
Okay.
it wasn't, then it was, so I'll make this motion I move to close the hearing and approve the proposed personnel policy regarding creation and administration of a sick bank for non-union employees.
Do we have to do that in 2 separate motions? I think so.
We probably do.
I'm looking at
I
Catherine.
was trying.
Oh, you can't do it, you have to do it.
Okay.
Do it in 2
so-
motions.
But it's gonna be weird to close the
Well,
hearing
just-
after we've all right.
That's fine.
I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Then I make the, I already made the other motion.
You have to do it
approving
again- you have to do it again.
I move to approve, okay.
No,
The-
for her.
I move to approve the proposed personnel policy regarding creation and administration of a sick bank for non-union employees.
Second.
Any more discussion? No? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
No, we can't have the flaw in this thing.
No, you're right, you're right. Oh, so, who's got this next? Let's see. Well, the thing I'm not even going to read because I can't read it. Oh, I have it. No, I don't.
I have it, I think.
Good. Is it, where is?
Good.
Discussion on potential approval of proposed, oh, you just did that. Letter of support for grant application, that's me.
Oh, there it is, yeah. Okay, great.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay.
I'm done. Except I'll call for the votes in a minute. Discussion, whatever.
So, the town's hazard mitigation plan was drafted in 2012 with assistance at the time, grant funding actually from, it was federal grant funding. MAPC did hazard mitigation plans for 17 communities on the North Shore. We are one of them. Has to be, they're good for 5 years, so ours is technically expired as of last year. Hazard mitigation plans generally look at, particularly for Wenham, flooding issues, culverts, drainage, and the like. So if you look back at our action plan from 2012, we've actually made some good headway. Essex Street culvert, Hull Street
Yeah,
culvert,
right.
radios for new portable radios for fire and police. There's a fair amount of things we can check off as having been completed, or at least in process of being completed, so that's good. But you have to have a current hazard mitigation plan. I mean, it's obviously important to do a reset and understand what we've done, what we should be doing over the next 5 years, but it also, you have to have a current plan to be eligible for FEMA mitigation grant funding, which is one of the few sources of funding for culvert work and the like, although there've been, you know, a couple new programs at the state level, which has been great that we've tapped into. So last time around, like I said, there was this FEMA grant funding and the MAPC did the work. That's not available at this stage and isn't expected to be available for at least a year, if not a couple years. In the meantime, the state has come up with another new municipal-centric grant program to try to give communities some grant funding, technical assistance to help out with this kind of planning. And it's what they're terming municipal vulnerability preparedness, which is a designation. It was a new program as of last year. I think 71 communities were designated last year. It's in some ways targeted a little more toward coastal communities. But when you look at the list from last year and see where the public outreach is in terms of the meetings to get the word out about this grant program this year, it's probably 50-50 in terms of the communities that are designated as such and have access to grant funding. And so this would, by applying for this designation and going through their process, we would be eligible for between $10,000 and $75,000 in grant funding. Probably going to be closer to the low end of that. The last time around, the MAPC's technical assistance for our update to our hazard mitigation plan was $20,000. An update presumably is going to be a little lighter in terms of grant funding. But we would receive grant funding to do that work. And then there's, you know, this additional outreach that is required through this program, specifically looking at, it's kind of this workshop format. There's a one-day forum that the town would host, and it's geared kind of more broadly towards dealing with resiliency and climate change impacts, and discussions along those lines. But it ties right back in, for our purposes, back to the hazard mitigation plan. So there's a grant application is due next Friday. It was a relatively quick turnaround. We didn't really hear about this until a week or so ago. Margaret attended an information session on Tuesday. And one of the elements of our application is that we need a letter of support from the Board of Selectmen saying that we agree to seek this designation and will be involved in the process. And so that's really what we're talking about.
Okay, let me read the motion. I vote to approve a letter of support authorizing, should be authorizing,
Yep.
not authorized, Catherine A. Harrison, to my left, to execute the letter of support on behalf of the Select Board.
I would second that motion.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous.
Okay.
Do we get to adjourn now?
Well, I just,
Other matters have not been reasonably anticipated by the chair? I doubt if there's anything.
well, there is one.
Oh, there is.
And it's not really a matter. It's just, we had a half, in my estimation, sort of a part of a discussion last week, and you mentioned it earlier, relative to tennis courts. We had a public hearing, and
Yep.
we got a lot of input.
Yep.
But what we didn't, I think, because it was kind of going on, but we didn't have our conversation about what we think and what we should do and what are the steps. And we have asked Peter to ask the schools in Hamilton to provide some input. So this is a request, I guess, if you guys agree, that once you get some information in a timely fashion from Hamilton and the school district, that we make sure that this gets on an agenda again to the priority that everyone wants us to give it in, because we didn't discuss it. So
And
I
I-
just
and I
want that
did-
to be on an agenda item,
I
another.
did reach out to both Hamilton and the schools. I already heard back from Hamilton, and I'll let the board know as soon as I get a response back from the schools. But the request was looking for input from the school committee, so I assume it would have to get put on an agenda and then.
I think we have a lot of outstanding issues. One is to find out definitively, the school's interested. Don't forget that, based on the question I asked the tennis coach, what schools on the North Shore did not have school-owned tennis courts, none except Newbury, and that you can, we have one, but it's inoperable. No, only Newbury Port, I'm sorry, didn't have I said, that was striking. We don't know what the plans are. We've just discussed this when we talked about the school committee. I was disappointed that Deb Evans bolted from the podium before I could ask her. You were the former vice chairman of the school committee a year ago, and you must have had some deliberation about this. Please share the thoughts of the school committee that you were vice chair at the time, but I didn't get a chance to ask that, and she's not here tonight, so I obviously can't ask it. There are other questions. I listened to Dennis Curran saying, you should go all the way on the number 3 and wreck the place and build it all over again. However, you got the trees there. We have all of these hemlocks, and it's just going to happen all over again. So that either the question is, should we relocate the tennis courts to someplace else where there aren't hemlocks, or cut down all the hemlocks that a root system's going to destroy, and whatever we build there in a premature order that otherwise a tennis court could other survive. And the hemlocks are also presumably not providing the shade at the sun, preventing the sun from drying up the court, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a question, should we really rebuild in that particular site? And that I don't think anybody else brought up what Dennis Curran brought up, and I thought that was very, very, very important. The Hamilton courts that, we're playing on those, but not really good either. Something about the equating it to a basketball court that's 9.5 feet tall, whatever it is. What's it, 10.5 feet? Something. So that, and they're deteriorating, so that, my God almighty, and so that, let's say that Wenham goes ahead, and one way or the other, there's 3 ways to get the money, and I'll describe that in a second, we go ahead and that Hamilton courts continue to deteriorate, Patton Park that is, and that the school, the tennis team is back in the same situation they're in now, with only Wenham providing local home court advantage. That doesn't sound good to me either. So that there's lots of issues here. There's obviously the CPA. I asked Peter to review the amount of money the CPA has available in 2 separate buckets called open space and the general something or other. General budget is $1.3 million, and so there's certainly money available if we, the selectmen, some other group, wants to petition for a CPA approval, whether or not there's the committee members are enthusiastic about that. That's another story, but that shouldn't prevent us from asking it. So there's really, as I'm thinking about it, there's 3 ways to, I think I was convinced the other night, and I'll stop talking in a second. that we shouldn't do the quick fix, and that you know, and that it's, although if someone said you can get this up and running for $2,000, you know, scraping, put some hot top down for this, I would be in favor of that, by the way, but I didn't hear that, so, and I think that there was enough convincing dialogue about doing it, wrecking it, and that, my words, and starting all over again and building the right court along with the hemlock trees issue, or relocating it, is probably the way to go for $300,000. And that, so there's 3 ways to fund this. And one, we could ask the schools to say, why don't you step up to the plate, and your critical priorities, what did they call it this year?
Critical priorities was the
That was the,
additional amount of money
yeah,
above the
yeah.
level.
So maybe you can add the tennis courts, the critical priorities, and 300,000 plus or whatever, and the exact amount, and that put that, you know, and which would be an override for us, and maybe in Hamilton, maybe not, whatever. 2, we can put it on a tax rate, and doesn't feel good to me at all, not when there's a 1.3 million sitting there in CPA funds that we can access, we meaning the town and the constituent can access, or I think I just did all 3 of them. So schools, a tax rate, and the CPA funding. So that I think that there's, I was a little disturbed that Wenham is being required to provide home court advantage for the schools. Didn't feel right to me. I understand that, and I looked at all of the emails that we received, and that several of these from the town of Hamilton, and some of these, they didn't note their address, but I went in the telephone book and looked up the people. I couldn't find them in the most recent Hamilton-Wenham telephone book, which means they weren't from either Hamilton or Wenham, but they're presumably supporters of the Hamilton tennis program, boys, girls, or whatever. So that, and I also noticed that, not that I'm going to speak against this, that several of the emails were verbatim. The words were exactly the same, paragraph, paragraph, paragraph. So there was something that was circulated, not all of them, but many of them, circulated that to repeat these points, and they did, and so that...
Talking points?
Yeah, and so reminiscent of other campaigns of past law that I've been the recipient of, not recently, but so I think there's lots of work to do in this, and that I think that this is only May, early May, and that it's a long way away from. But I think we need to start. You've already started asking the questions, and so how does Hamilton feel about this, and how do the schools feel about it? You've already inquired about that, and that so we need a lot of further input. And that I think that John struck up on a point that you couldn't get an answer to it, even though I watched the tape and you asked 4 times, John, and that I was wanted to say shut up, but I couldn't say that in front of but the usage statistics. I don't have any usage. We don't have any usage statistics, John. They said enough often enough. Anyway, you kept it.
Well, you don't come to them, in other words. You don't
I
come
got
to
it.
a meeting unprepared.
Well, I got it, so that you let them know that John and usage statistics, John usage commences anyway. But I think that's an important point, and so that I don't know how you get to that, and that so absent the high schools tennis teams utilizing it, what desire is there for people who are not on the tennis team to use a tennis court? So when we had the pool, we did an outreach program to say, okay, send us some emails, and that absent the high school tennis team and their supporters, what is the level of recreational tennis that people are desirous of spending the money, whether it's our own tax money, CPA tax money previously collected, or putting it on asking the schools could say no, and that's the end of that, I suppose. And that, but I think that to get to John's point, it'd be interesting to one way to see if we can outreach to the town, use what we did with the pool, but trying to find out what is the level of interest in us spending one way or the other, either CPA money, tax money, or I suppose Hamilton Wenham, to replace recreationally the tennis courts at Pingree Park. I don't know, but I think that be nice to find out a way to get that in an unbiased way, so we don't get these emails that we're getting from the same emails from the.
Well, a name and address would be. probably.
Yeah, and so
reasonably
we're interested in Wenhamites only, and that this is the Wenham courts. We're interested in not, even Dacia Rebel said, well, I snuck over from Hamilton and used it. I'm not interested in, the people who want to sneak over from Hamilton and use their tennis courts. But nevertheless, I think that we should try to come up with a gauge to find out the level of interest to spend a significant amount of money. And I'll keep quiet, but I don't know exactly what we do. We did that with the pools in that we did get, as I recall, 62 responses, and that they were overwhelmingly in favor of it, but they were, anyway.
Yeah, so I
done.
think that's good. My point there is that there clearly needs to be more discussion. It needs to be on another agenda, and we've now identified even more of the information that we're going to need in order to have our continued substantive discussions. The other question I'm curious to get opinion on is, yes, it might take a little time just because of their process for
We have the
to
time
hear
right
back
now.
from the schools. But at what point in time, and I'm not sure we can put a date on this, but is there a point in time where if we don't hear back from the schools, we just move on? And I just.
Yeah, a month, 30 days, either.
Because it's hard, you hear, again, process-wise, we hear very loudly that it's people's priority, and we want to react to it as a
Yeah.
priority, and this board will be criticized for it not being on an agenda, not being a priority, when in fact, we're ready to talk about it, and we haven't heard from the schools. So, I will reach out to the new chair of the school committee when I get back, to just say, I know you've received a request, that I assume the request went to the administration, and I'll just reach out to the chair and say,
Well, I think we should wait, see if they answer it. I mean,
well, yeah, it'll be, 2 weeks before or a week and a half before I can
Well,
get back.
this is May. We're talking about, something that's really, if we're going to do
It's
something,
not
we need
gonna
to have.
happen this,
Yeah,
well, it's
we
not
need to
gonna go
have
in
this
place
all
this
teed up
year.
by late summer, early fall, and even later than that, but we certainly have plenty of time. And you know what, I also wanted to ask, this is for the people listening audience, I wanted to ask how many people in the audience actually attended town meeting? Anybody in the audience from Wenham could have raised their hand in town meeting and say, excuse me, on the budget, the tennis courts are in deplorable condition. I want to move that we add to the override vote $300,000 to replace and repair the Pingree tennis courts. And then we could have had a debate on town. We just had the meeting 2 weeks ago. And so all of a sudden we're debating something that's a significant amount of money. And we can match them. I can't match the people here. I know who some of the people attended, but the whole point of town government is you come to town meeting and raise issues that if we didn't put money in there for the tennis courts, shame on the people who came here and didn't attend town meeting and didn't raise their hand. I think the tennis courts are deplorable, although you can't ask for CPA money that's already been passed over by the deadline that they imposed, which is early January. But anybody on the floor could have said, I want to add $300,000 to the override issue, and the town could have voted for that 3 weeks ago. And that to the point that you're either not aware of the protocol or process, but I don't recall, not that I have that great of a recall, many of the people I saw in the audience at that annual town meeting, or the one that we had this is for the people who are listening in and not liking what I'm saying. We have an annual town meeting. You could have raised the issue at the town meeting and had a debate right then, and you would have had depending upon what time you raised it, early or middle or late, you could have had well over at least 138 people listening to you and deciding whether or not we should stop the horses and decide to allocate a significant amount of money to the Pingree tennis courts. And you would have had your answer then, and so would we. And so that, this is governed by the people. You need to show up for these meetings. And that there was lots of other meetings you could have showed up for, the Warren hearing, there were finance committee meetings, lots of issues. And all of a sudden to show up 2 weeks after town meeting, we've already allocated all the money, and you haven't paid attention to the town budgeting process, you got to pay attention.
I think relative to the timing, and again, I don't want to deliberate, to get into deliberation, but relative to the timing of how this works, I don't, June's going to be a busy month, but I don't think it's too soon to start pushing people who need to give us information
Yeah.
soon, because we know this is going just to take a while to come to some agreement. We have to say, we've got to get agreement from 3 entities. So I think, to your point, by the end of the summer, early fall, we need to have a plan
Yeah.
that we move
And input,
forward
you know,
with.
Town of Hamilton, and we don't have to ask the CPA, we're gonna, you know.
No, but there's.
Right, and that,
it's a-
certainly, we have to, how solid were those estimates from Gail for $300,000 to do it? I mean, is that just a rough guess, or is that, you know?
No, I mean, that, if you look at the scope of work, it wasn't, I mean, my cover memo was rounding, but if you look at their price proposal, and you add the, you know, the soft costs and fencing and everything else, those are real current numbers.
Okay, but I wasn't personally surprised, but I think a lot of people were surprised. In the pool, they had a guesstimate, and that the initial bids to basically replace the pool were way over the estimates, way over. So I'm just a little nervous that we don't have, this is Gail's estimate of what it would take, but these, we don't have any proposals from people who actually do the work. And so, you know.
Correct. They haven't
So
been,
it hasn't
they
been
haven't been,
corrected.
they haven't been vetted by an estimator. We haven't gotten to that point in the process. But I think that, I'll say generally, they are fair numbers but they are conservative. And I also will say
Okay.
that construction of a tennis court, especially if you're starting from scratch, is a much more reliable project to estimate the cost of.
Than the pool.
Because
I would agree.
Right, because there are a lot less complicating factors.
Yeah, so we also should look at, as I mentioned a minute ago, that if this existing tennis courts are an undesirable physical location, perhaps we should look at other areas in the town of Wenham where these tennis courts wouldn't be subject to the root problems that we had with the hemlocks that Dennis Curran talked about, and that, whatever. And, you know,
May I say something, Jack?
no, John, this is my agenda. Well, I'm going to keep talking. You know in the Senate where they have the Senate,
Well, I want to
what do they call in the
support
Senate, that, you know, you have the,
Don't forget, we're not really deliberating. We're just talking about having a future agenda item.
Just kidding.
So,
No,
I'm sorry, I have a few more things to say.
this is getting to be like the water issue with you. I can see Jack's going to dominate this
I'm on
subject.
this issue. As Catherine said, we need to talk. I'm on this issue.
yeah, you are, and I appreciate that.
I have no idea, first of all. I'm going to sound a bit critical, but I'm not critical to the issue or to the need or the conditions. I'm critical to, let me round it out in a minute. To your point, Jack, I think the town meeting would have been very appropriate to bring it up and ask, let's see what we can do. There are plenty of opportunities. That's why I pleaded ignorant the other night. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Well, where else have I heard about it? Yeah, Peter had it in a report some time ago, but that's it. Now, many of the people who were here the other night were at our town meeting. So your
Some,
point
I would
is,
say some, John. You use the
Yep.
word many, I would
well,
say
there's at
some.
least 4 that I know of. if
Yeah,
not
but there's a
more.
lot more than 4 people there, John. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Correct.
You're-
Anyways.
you're- I said
And
enough
it's more,
already.
I'm more concerned about how it has been presented to this board as we're the problem, we're the guys who have to figure out what the problem is and the need is, and fix it. Yet, we've got coaches, we've got town folks, other enthusiasts to tennis who ought to be willing to at least proffer. It bothers me when people come in and drop bombs, and then you've got to figure out how to deal with the bomb. Instead of offering something to the situation and say, gee, I'd be glad to get started on this. How do I do this? I didn't hear I in anybody's commentary. It was all, you guys have to do something about it.
If we're all tennis players, we would have known the Pingree Park
Well, that's-
was bad, but I'm,
Yeah,
you know, I haven't played tennis there for years.
Sure.
And besides, it's been under snow for the last 6 months, so
And
that,
again,
right?
to your other point, Jack, we just did the pool project, we just did 2 playground projects, and those were, what, majority self-funded?
Correct, yeah.
Okay,
Well, the pool was not. But
No,
the,
no.
but the playgrounds have been.
right, and
And 50% private funding for the
look
playground.
at the folks that volunteered to step right up to the plate and be part of the solution. That's what I want to see. I don't want to have a bunch of people come in and just criticize and then say, you figure it out. come in with a concern, and how do we solve it, and can I play a role in this? So it's an attitude thing, first of all. Second of all, to the fundraising, as I said, look at the fundraising they did there. I mean, we're not talking pennies over there. These were
$50,000, right, Pete?
hundreds, no, yeah.
No, it was more than
More,
that.
yeah.
It was,
No, private funding, I'm talking.
private fundraising, I think, was in the low 70s. I wish I could.
was gonna say 75, but-
Yeah, I think it's 75, but it's plus or minus $1,000 there.
Okay, so,
Very impressive.
so
They
there's
were
a lot of that
highly
that can be done, and we need more hands. It's not the Board of Selectmen or Peter or a department head that's gonna resolve this. We need some support. So I think there may be a very real need, but to walk in here and not have at least some concept of a usage need, I think
You made
Daisha
that
was.
point, John.
Daisha
There's no
was-
question
Daisha
about
was
it.
probably the most informative on that, where she said, they're so bad, nobody wants to come. Well, how better a point can you make? Okay, how do you weigh that in there? So anyways,
Okay,
that's
so
all
we're
I'm
gonna-
gonna say at the moment.
To be continued.
Yep.
Be
Clearly,
continued.
there's more to talk
Absolutely.
about on
Yep.
this, and I will get it, it'll be on an agenda, coming soon.
But the point is, we heard them, and we're talking about this, and we just talked about this in the last 20 minutes, and that
it
we
is-
have researched, there are options, we're pursuing options, and that we have questions, and that we've already articulated some of the questions.
And it's good to, I think, articulate the questions so we can know what they are, try to get answers for them. That said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved?
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned.